Our story begins on Polis Massa in the year 19 BBY. Padme Amidala has just given birth to Luke and Leia, but she is growing weaker. The medic droids don't know what is happening and have no way to treat her, but Obi Wan has one last idea. He can't let Padme die. He reaches out through the Force, feeling the last of her living Force leave her body, and begins to give his own life force to her. It would weaken Obi Wan severely to do this, but he would still survive as Padme started to stabilize, her breath and pulse becoming steadier. Her living force moved no more, and her eyes fluttered open as she was still alive. When Padme was well enough too, she, Obi-Wan, Yoda, and Bail Organa would meet to discuss what they would do to hide the twins. Obi-Wan believed that Anakin was dead, and this crushed Padme, but her resolve had never been stronger. Padme would not allow the twins to be separated. Bail would offer sanctuary for them on Alderaan, and Obi-Wan would watch over the family, as they would pretend to be refugees, while Yoda would go to Dagobah, as he taught Obi-Wan how he could commune with his former master, Qui-Gon Jinn. The next few years would be rough for our heroes, though. Padme and Obi-Wan would take on assumed names as they would have to pretend to be a family on Alderaan, as they would work as servants to the Organa family. This would lead to Luke and Leia being sent to an elite school on Alderaan, as Padme would help Bail form the rebellion from the shadows. Obviously, if any of them were caught by the Empire, it would be treason, but Padme's reappearance would be dealt with by the Emperor himself, as he had been trying to kill her since before the Clone Wars. But not everything was positive for our heroes on Alderaan. Obi-Wan was struggling, blaming himself for what Anakin had become, and nothing anyone could say would change his mind. He had blocked himself off from the Force completely. He said it was so the Sith couldn't sense their presence, but Padme knew that wasn't all that it was. She just hoped that he wouldn't put too much pressure on the twins. Years would pass as Obi-Wan and the Amidalas would be kept safe on Alderaan, but the Empire would grow stronger. The Inquisitors would start to become a problem, and one in particular would think she had a way to hunt down one particular Jedi Master. Eva would notice how there were two particular children that Bail Organa seemed to care for amongst his servants, and she believed that if she could take one of them, then Organa would enlist the help of Obi-Wan Kenobi. But the more she watched Organa with these two children, Reva would have a realization. Kenobi appeared to be in the area, and these appeared to be Kenobi's children. But there would be too much risk to take them herself. If Kenobi was on Alderaan and she failed, then the political power of Bail Organa would be too strong, and unless the Emperor himself got involved, she would be the scapegoat and would be killed. Organa was too important for the Imperial Senate. So instead she would send two bounty hunters to kidnap one of the twins, and after way too much fumbling, bumbling, and stumbling, they would take Leia. There would be no hesitation for Obi-Wan to go after her this time, though, but he would learn the one thing that would send a chill down his spine like nothing else could.
Anakin Skywalker is alive.
Obi-Wan couldn't believe it. He didn't want to believe it, but it was true. He would even have to fight him, as he just barely escaped with his life. It was only how much he cared for Luke, Leia, and Padme that allowed him to reconnect with the Force as he defeated Vader, realizing that his friend was truly dead. Upon his return to Alderaan with Leia, Padme would immediately know something was wrong with him. He didn't want to tell her, but he came back looking like he had seen a ghost, and in a way, he had. The twins were asleep. Obi-Wan knew that her patience had run out. She was going to find out what happened. She had always been stubborn. It was times like this that Obi-Wan had to wonder how she and Anakin were married, since Anakin could be just as stubborn. He tried to tell her the problem was that Leia knew that he was a Jedi now, and she was worried about what that would mean, especially since Luke and Leia thought that Obi-Wan was their father, and would start to wonder if they also had the same gift, but she still knew that wasn't it. And at this point, he would have to tell her. Darth Vader was still alive. Anakin was still alive. Of course, Padme's first reaction would be to go after Anakin, that there was still good in him, but Obi-Wan had seen what he had become. that he was more machine now than man. And for the first time, Obi Wan would tell Padme everything that happened on Mustafar, that he left Anakin to burn. He thought he was dead, but he had wanted to leave it to the Force. He reminded her of all the things that he had done, siding with Palpatine, the younglings, even now as he believed that he was partially responsible for Leia's kidnapping. Padme wouldn't believe that Anakin was all bad, though. She couldn't. But for Luke and Leia's safety, along with the rebellion, she wouldn't seek him out. They would have to start training the twins as Jedi, though, for their own safety. Obi-Wan wasn't sure that it was the best decision, but if it kept Padme from going after Vader and exposing all of them, then he was all for it. Over the next 10 years, Obi-Wan would train the twins as they would begin to explore just how powerful they were. But as they got older, they would also both want to join the rebellion. But Obi-Wan and Padme wouldn't allow it yet. There was too much risk, and they still had to be hidden from the Sith. Padme would struggle with the knowledge that Anakin was out there still, doing who knows what as the Empire would continue to dominate the galaxy in the name of peace. She wondered if it would mean anything if he knew she was still alive. It haunted her every night. Their powers would continue to grow. Luke and Leia would question more and more why they couldn't join the rebellion. They wanted to help the galaxy and were frustrated that Obi-Wan was holding them back. These words haunted Padme. She had heard them before from their father, and she knew that they had to at least start getting them involved in the rebellion, even though she was scared of the risk of losing them to Emperor Palpatine, just like she had lost their father. Another problem would come to Obi-Wan and the Amidala's as Ezra Bridger would seek out Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan would send the others away as he found the young boy unconscious in the forest. When he woke up, he was insistent that Obi-Wan was the answer to defeating the Sith, to which Obi-Wan would play dumb. Ezra would be insistent, though, saying Obi-Wan must be trying to learn more about the Empire if he's staying on Alderaan, though Obi-Wan would just say that one does not get to his age by being foolish, and that it was better to stay informed here. Before Ezra's questioning could continue, though, Maul would appear ready to kill Obi-Wan after all these years. Obi-Wan would send Ezra away, and the two rivals would start a dialogue as Maul would realize that Obi-Wan had a purpose here, protecting someone. Now Maul could not leave. The fight was over as quickly as it started. Maul had fallen for Obi-Wan's trick, and as his rival was dying in his arms, the two saw Luke and Leia with their blades out, worried for the man who had raised them like a father, but now were impressed as they could see what he once was, and still is. Luke and Leia's involvement in the rebellion would increase over the next 2 years, as rumors of a planet killer would start to emerge. This would eventually culminate in a rogue squad starting an attack on Scarus that would end with Leia on Captain Antilles' ship with the plans for the Death Star. Unfortunately for Leia, she would still be caught by the Empire and captured by Vader. There were two things she was focused on in this moment: keeping her Force ability away from the Empire and protecting the plans for the Death Star, so she sent escape pods to Tatooine, Geonosis, and Kol Iben, with R2-D2 and C-3PO on an escape pod sent to Tatooine. Then, as stormtroopers were docking on the Ramus Antilles, she reached out to her brother through the Force and let him know that he and Obi-Wan would have to go to Tatooine to retrieve the plans. The two of them would leave Yavin 4 immediately as Leia was taken prisoner on the Death Star, and with Bail on his way to Alderaan, Padme would stay on Yavin as the highest-ranking member of the rebellion. Obi-Wan would have a quick reminder, though, of why he shouldn't trust a Skywalker pilot, as the Empire would try and shoot them down over Tatooine, as Luke was just skilled enough as a pilot for them to survive.
Another happy landing.
Once on Tatooine, Obi-Wan and Luke would try to track down the Jawas and retrieve R2 and 3PO, but with no ship, they would have to travel to Mos Eisley to find someone to take them back to Alderaan, and here they would get a scruffy-looking smuggler who could fly some hunk of junk to Alderaan to make sure they had no tail before getting back to Yavin. But on the way to Alderaan there was one problem. There was no Alderaan. Destroyed by the Death Star that would then take them prisoner. Luke would realize Leia was here, and Obi Wan would realize what he would have to do and would go alone to remove the tractor beam. And after doing what he set out to do, Obi Wan would come across Vader again, and he would sacrifice himself, turning into a ghost before Vader could strike him down so that Luke and Leia would be able to escape. Upon their return to the rebellion, Luke and Leia would have to tell their mother that Obi-Wan was dead, but there was no time to mourn yet, as the Death Star would soon enter Yavin space. With Obi-Wan in his ear and Han having his back, Luke would once again destroy the Death Star. The rebellion would still have to flee their base, though, and for the next 3 years they would manage to stay one step ahead of the Empire as they built a base on Hoth. But the Empire would still eventually find them, and they would have to escape, with Luke leaving for Dagobah on Obi-Wan's word, confirming that Yoda was real from his mother, and Padme joining Leia, Han, and Chewie on the Falcon. This would eventually lead to Han taking them to Bespin to meet Lando, where Vader was waiting for them, to learn that Padme was still alive. Padme showed no fear as she was taken prisoner. All these years, she had wanted this. There still had to be good in Anakin, and he could help them now. But Vader couldn't bring himself to face her right away. He was here for Luke, the one who destroyed the Death Star, and Leia, who had been able to resist his interrogation techniques, especially when he learned they were twins. They could be very useful in him overthrowing the Emperor, but now that Leia was here with Padme, he had to know. But fear had overtaken him, and rather than face her, he focused on the Emperor's mission as he froze Han in carbonite, before turning to do the same to Leia. She gave a fight, but she was no match for Vader, and was also frozen in carbonite. After sending Leia to his ship to be sent to the Emperor, and using Han as bait for Luke, he would take Padme to the same room he had tortured Han in hours earlier. "I was beginning to think you didn't recognize me," Padme said. Vader would reveal that he knew about Luke and Leia, that the Emperor had figured it out, that they were his offspring, but that he hadn't known that Padme was still alive. Padme would use the opportunity to try to convince him to turn back, to join them and overthrow the Empire.
"It is too late for me."
But Padme wouldn't take no for an answer, telling him that she loved him, that she knew there was still good in him, and that it was never too late. That was why he wanted Luke and Leia, not for the Emperor. Before he could make a decision, though, an Imperial officer told him that Luke was here, and Vader would go after him and have Padme sent to his ship. But as she and Chewie were being taken there, Lando would break them free, as he and the Wookiee would go after Han, while Padme would go after Luke. Vader would be getting the upper hand in his duel with Luke as Padme entered, throwing him off like only she could. Luke would take the upper hand now, but before he could strike down Obi-Wan's killer, Padme would dive in front of Anakin. Luke would be shocked that his mother would save Vader, but not as shocked as when she told him that he was his father. But Luke's shock would still come second to Anakin right now, as Padme would tell him she loved him, that she never stopped loving him, and that they needed to be a family if they were going to save Leia. Vader would be as shocked as Luke right now. Even more so. Luke could have killed him, but didn't, and Padme was there for him, willing to die saving him after everything he had done. Maybe there was good in him still. Maybe Anakin was still in there. The Emperor had not driven it from him fully yet. He would tell them that they needed to get to Coruscant, that the Emperor would be trying to turn Leia to the dark side, and they would have to move quickly if they were going to save her. When they got to Coruscant, Anakin used his own clearance to hide Padme and Luke as they entered the Emperor's chambers. The Emperor would feel the shift in Anakin as he quickly attacked him for his lack of vision, hoping to turn Luke and Leia. The twins would take their lightsabers and attack the Emperor, but he cackled as he fought back fiercely. As Anakin joined the fight, his blade now a blinding white from his now healed kyber crystal, Palpatine knew he could quickly get overwhelmed and realized the one thing he could do to turn all 3 Skywalkers to the dark side: attack Padme. But this would quickly backfire because as soon as her screams were heard, Anakin would fall back to the dark side as he grabbed Palpatine through the Force, choking him as hard as he could as Palpatine would aim his lightning at him, short-circuiting his breathing apparatus, but nothing could stop Anakin right now. But before Anakin could finish the job, a blue blade would pierce through the Emperor's chest. Luke had killed the Emperor, protecting his father from falling fully back to the dark side and freeing all of them. But it still came at a cost. Vader's suit no longer functioned, and he could no longer breathe. He asked Padme to take off his mask, and they would have one last moment as a family before Anakin Skywalker became one with the Force. Without Palpatine and Vader, the Empire would not last much longer in the war, as Padme and Mon Mothma would restore democracy to the galaxy, and Luke and Leia would rebuild the Jedi Order, bringing Yoda back from Dagobah as a wise old sage for the rest of his life. The galaxy would know peace again thanks to the Skywalkers, and Han would be saved from Jabba's palace again, though for some reason it took about a year. And that's the story for today. Thanks for sticking around this long, and let me know in the comments if there are any other what-ifs you would like to see, whether it's Star Wars or Harry Potter or even Wicked, now that Wicked for Good is out. But if you enjoyed the video today, please drop a like, subscribe if you want more like this, and I'll see you next time on STV.